Let's stay with this and bring you some analysis, but first let's hear from Panyaza Lesufi himself after being elected as the 7th Gauteng Premier. He attracted 38 votes against 22 for the DA candidate, Msimanga. At least 60 votes were cast in the Provincial Legislature today, with 12 members not participating and 1 abstention. Lesufi says he will continue with the work and vision of his predecessor, David Makhura, to improve the lives of Gauteng residents.
Our citizens are confronted with many challenges, but we must remain firm to defend, shield, but most importantly, serve them. Today, honorable members, is not a day of speeches, but to acknowledge and appreciate the vote of confidence bestowed on all of us to lead our province together. I want to take this opportunity to affirm one thing, that I'm just a last servant that must conclude the last part of our administration that was led by our dynamic former Premier, David Makhura. The Growing Gauteng 2030, which is our current provincial plan of action, was introduced to cement and position ourselves nationally so that we can seize the opportunity to make Gauteng economy workable. Growing Gauteng together remains a blueprint that we must continue to implement even beyond the era of Comrade David Makhura. This blueprint was not David Makhura's blueprint, it was our blueprint, and we are proud to take it forward, Comrade David Makhura. It's a blueprint that wants a growing province. It's a blueprint that wants a Gauteng that should be better by 2030. It's one that wants to encourage growth in terms of economy, jobs and infrastructure. One that encourages skills revolution in education and health. One that calls for integrated human settlement and land release. One that calls for safety, social cohesion and food security. One that calls for a capable, ethical and developmental leadership. It also calls for a better Africa in the world and the need to have a sustainable development for future generations. This is our plan, and this is the plan that will continue to implement. We are just going to re-elect the new leaders that will be part of the Executive Council, and will go to our retreat, and on the basis of that, we'll come to account to the people of Gauteng how we want to make Gauteng better.
We're now joined by political analyst Rebone Tau. Great to have you with us in studio. So are the hopes of the ANC to really show some sort of recovery at the polls in 2024, in Gauteng specifically, riding on Panyaza Lesufi?
I mean, it's about what is he going to do as the Premier. And I think we can give him up to maybe a year to then do an assessment, you know, if he's doing well as a Premier. So him, yes, being the Premier does not guarantee the ANC that they will win 2024. You know, don't be an easy journey for them, you know, because the challenges remain there.
Yeah.
And people, like, for now, there's so much pressure on him because now the society expects him, you know, to be a good leader, you know, as the Premier of Gauteng.
He did show a lot of energy in the education portfolio, certainly speaking to the public through the media a lot. Do you think the ANC wanted to see how that those qualities would play out in a premiership?
When you say energy, I'm a bit taken aback because I think we've not done a thorough assessment on the education system.
Yeah.
And I always say, for a mere fact that you still have a child from a township in Mamelodi or Soweto, leaving at 6 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, to go to a school in the suburban areas, that means that the education system is not the way it's supposed to be.
By energy, I meant if there was ever a problem, particularly claims of racism, he was on the ground, he was at the school, he was talking to both sides. But you're right, that doesn't mean that there was systemic change.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we've seen him, you know, going to schools, and some could say that he was a PR MEC, you know, who's always out there, you know, to say, I'm here. But as I'm saying, that the issues are not about being out there, but it's seeing the change. And for me, as I say, that if you still have a child from a township going to the school in the suburban areas, that means that children who their parents can't afford are deprived of better and decent education in this province.
Yeah. One of the things he was concerned about, and he often spoke to us about, was the fact that good schools in sort of suburban areas that were formerly white were sort of protected, you know, and you use policies to make sure that siblings get in, and you keep people out, people from the township. So he wanted actually a mix. He wanted a mix of teachers. Have we seen some shifts?
You know, I always say, those, especially if you look at the Afrikaner schools, not everything is bad. And there are lessons that the ANC government can learn from those Afrikaner schools. Because those Afrikaner schools, you've got parents who are very active, the business community around the school that's very active, that make sure that the schools are well taken care of and so forth. So these are things that I think he should have learned. How do they do it, you know, so that we can also take that back? Because the same child who leaves the township is a child of someone who the parents, we could say, a middle class, but the child of the poor, they will never have that access to go to the school because they can't afford the fees. So it's not about the policies, but it's about a system that allows, when we talk about free, better education, the child in this township must not suffer.
Yeah, and like you say, it's also about access to a school nearby.
Yeah.
A good township school. There's a dearth of schools in general, never mind township schools.
Because I mean, waking up at 5 as if you're going to work. So that child, by the time they get to work, to school, they're tired. By the time they get home, they're tired because of the hours that they've spent commuting between their homes and the school.
Look, Johannesburg certainly is facing an influx of people, and his department suggested it was very hard just to keep up in terms of building new schools, and you've got various departments involved. So you're saying he could have done better, and then we'll move away from Panyaza Lesufi as the MEC.
There are schools that have been there since apartheid in the townships. Let's go and look at the status of that school. Those schools. Let's go and look at the quality, you know, even of the teaching, you know, and then we can say we have improved, or the government has improved, you know, since 1994, in making sure that they transform those schools, because the infrastructure there are so many schools also, by the way, in the townships that have closed down, you know, they're not operating anymore. Why not reopen those schools? Why do you have to rebuild new schools when you can just revamp those schools and then the kids can go there? But make sure that also the quality, and also because sometimes you build a school, then there's a break in tomorrow. How do you bring the community on board? How do you bring the business community on board? How do you bring the parents on board? Because they also have to make sure that these schools are protected. As I make an example, how many schools within the Afrikaner community that you can tell me that have regular break-ins, you know, compared to when you see a school that is newly built in the township, we have seen that have had so many break-ins.
Yeah. All right, so moving away from MEC of education, although, I mean, his philosophy still counts, that he really was abhorred by the fact that there were many white teachers teaching white kids, black teachers teaching black kids, that there hadn't been a mix. Do you think we'll see that playing out now in terms of the concerns about spatial development in Gauteng, in the big cities? In Joburg, for example, we see sort of shanty towns sort of developing on the sides of highways. People are concerned. That is mixed development, but it's nothing like what was foreseen to break those racial barriers.
I mean, the racial barriers, I think, will always be there, and I'll tell you why. When the government talks about a rainbow nation, it's not really a rainbow nation, because for the mere fact that we still have to deal with some of the racist situations, you know, within the society, we have not, as a society, you know, I always say there's what we call national interests, And South Africa, we don't have clear national interests when it comes to our foreign policy.
Yeah.
What unites us across racial groups, this is what I think the ANC and the government has failed to advance. They just said, okay, apartheid is done, we're a rainbow nation. Not dealing with some of the root causes, because it is important that we remain united as a nation. It is united that we support each other. It can't be that we only support each other when there's a sports game,
Well, my impression of Panyaza Lesufi is that he's the type of leader who will push policies through. To end geographic racism, say, whether people like it or not. Is that what's needed? Or is it more about getting people on board and, like you say, learning from different groups of people?
You can't force something down people's throats. I always say there was never an apology that was given to black people in this country. That's why sometimes we can see the arrogance of some white people, because they feel that they don't owe black people anything. We see even how some farm workers at times are treated by some white Afrikaner community. So you can't force something, but this is something that you need people to walk with you in this journey. You need to bring people on board and have the difficult conversations so that when we agree, even when there's a disagreement in the house, when I'm forced to say I'm sorry to you in the house, when I don't mean it, when I leave that door, I'm not going to implement what we agreed upon. But once I'm on board fully, I'm able then, when I leave the door, to even preach to others. So we need such leadership.
He has pointed out some of the many problems, besides even what we're talking about now: corruption, lawlessness, that huge urban influx as well, many people migrating to Gauteng. What do you think is his number one task as Premier?
I think one of the things that he really needs to deal with, the crime in Gauteng is too high. And one of the things is that it's because of what you talk about, the influx. People come to Gauteng for better living conditions. People to come to Gauteng because they want jobs. And when they arrive here, then there's no jobs. And that leads to what? People loitering the street, people start doing crime. So I think one of the things that they really need to focus on is making sure they create jobs. Because you see, when you create jobs, you're giving people options how to be better in society. People don't even have to apply for RDP houses, for an example. People, if they have decent jobs, people can build their own houses. And then the issue of land, I think that we need to come to a point where the government can allocate land at a reasonable, price, where people can just buy land and actually build their own houses, because land is also expensive if you are to buy from private companies.
All right, thank you. Well, we will be watching. And
you.
That was political analyst Rebone Tau looking at the incoming Premier, Panyaza Lesufi.